On 3rd and 3, they protect Brady. Scans the field and lets it fly. It's Evans. It's a touchdown.
This is the Big Nasty. Yeah, Big Nasty. Hall of Fame Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan, baby.
This is Mike Allstott, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you're listening to the Cannon Fire Podcast.
Cannon Fire Podcast, brother. You ain't listening, and you're missing out. Woo! And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rhett Matthew. Evan Wanish, not available for today's show. He is on the IR. We'll have him back for Friday's game preview. But joining us in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, former Buccaneers quarterback, Shaun King. We're really excited to have you bring this level of coverage to us this year. We announced it on the season prediction show that you're going to be joining us this year for a weekly mailbag show. And we are pumped to get your insight and really kick off a great year of Buccaneers coverage with you here today.
Well, I'm excited to be joining. Of course, I love my Bucks. From St. Petersburg, grew up a Buck fan. I never forget my dad was a minister. And I used to sneak out of church early because I don't know if you're familiar with the Black Baptist Church in the early to mid 80s and all the way probably into early 2000s. But 11 o'clock service didn't get over to like 2 and the Bucks started at 1. But you could only watch the Bucks when they were on the road because the NFL had the home blackout rule at the time. And so they weren't selling out the game. So I used to run and watch them play. What a time. By the way, Evan is like the majority of the Bucks interior offensive line not available, but we look forward to seeing him next week.
I'm excited to get your take on that. Today on the show, we're going to kind of break down the team and grade every position group, get your opinion on where you think they are and how far it's ultimately going to take Tampa Bay this season. So looking at the team as a whole, one hell of an offseason. I mean, one of the most memorable offseasons from beginning to end that we have had as Bucs fans. Things finish a little bit underwhelming. Obviously, they don't get the job done, eliminated in the divisional round against the eventual Super Bowl 56 champions in LA. Tom Brady talks about retirement, flirts with it, and we get an unofficial announcement from a couple of reporters that he's going to be announcing his retirement. Well, time goes by. Things have to get clarified because, of course, unless it's coming from the man itself, it seems like it's going to dominate the news cycle day in and day out. Officially, we get an announcement from Tom Brady that he isn't going to make the commitment to be a football player this year. And then 40 short days after that, he announces he's going to be back with Tampa Bay for his 23rd season. Obviously, things change with the Buccaneers and their side of things as well. Bruce Arians decides to step down, so now we see Todd Bowles in his first head coaching position since his tenure with the New York Jets. How do you think this team is going to do this year? I have seen predictions everywhere from winning 14, 15 games and obviously getting the 1 seed in the NFC to a lot of people thinking they don't even make the playoffs. How do you think this year is going to shake out for not only Todd Bowles and the Buccaneers, but Tom Brady as he is entering year 23?
I guess it's the $1 million question. I think the first thing I do when I'm assessing, overall results is look within the division. And I think the division is better than it was last year. Especially if Jameis Winston stays healthy for the entirety of the year for the New Orleans Saints. You look at that offensive group they have there with Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. They added Jarvis Landry. Alvin Kamara is going to avoid suspension, during the season. They upgraded his safety. They're an issue. Carolina, if you look at their roster, they have a pretty good roster if they can get the quarterback position fixed. Now, I don't think Baker Mayfield's in the running for NFL MVP, but I think he's the best quarterback they've had since Matt Rule has gotten there. So if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, they're better. So I think they're going to get more resistance. I know we lost both games with the Saints last year anyway, but I think the division is going to provide a little more resistance than it has in the past. Now, when you look internally, I guess the alarming part is since Brady's gotten here, this is the first offseason where the majority of the content wasn't strictly about improvement on the field. I think the 2 off seasons prior to this, everything that we heard from the end of the season to the beginning of the next season was all about, is Gronkowski going to return? How can they upgrade this area? Is this contract extension, going to be given? And for the first time, it's been a little different. They decided not to bring in Dominican Sue back, not to bring Jason Pierre-Paul back. Ali Marpet surprisingly retired. Alex Kappa left in free agency. Of course, the whole Tom Brady, I'm retiring. Bruce Arians. What did he step down? Did he get asked to step down? I mean, what really happened with that? He moved. I mean, so I think, it's going to be interesting. If there's any quarterback, I think, that has the intangible and intrinsic toughness to rally everybody in the midst of what I think has been minor chaos, it's probably Tom Brady. We'll find out, though. Is Chris Godwin healthy? Gage, who we picked up in the free agency, who I really liked, he hasn't been healthy, for the majority of his tenure here so far. So I think we have a lot more question marks than we've had the last couple of years, and I think the division is going to provide more resistance. So to answer your question, I'm going to go I think they have a margin between 9 and 12. And I'm not kind of copping out, but I think the floor is probably 9 wins and the ceiling is probably 12.
You look at the schedule, and I mean, that's what plays a major role in a lot of people's predictions this year. I know that I picked them at 12-5. Like, if I had to toss out a specific record, I would say it's 12-5 over under maybe 1 or 2 games at most as far as the floor and ceiling goes. But the opponents that they're facing are tough. The health becomes an issue later on in the season when you have these rough stretches of travel, because later on in the season, not only are they playing in Germany, but they're going to be going coast to coast multiple times. They'll be flying out to San Francisco. They'll be playing the Ravens on a short week as well. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but when we start to look at the team and performance on the field, the biggest thing on the offensive side of the ball I wanted to get your opinion on, and this plays a factor as well, is the offensive line, specifically the interior offensive line. I mean, it is brand new. It was announced this week that Luke Gedeke got the starting job at left guard, so he is going to be starting there. Ryan Hainsey at center, and NFL veteran Shaq Mason at right guard, who personally I don't think people are really giving him enough credit for as well as he has been in the NFL so far in his career, but it is a much bigger change than you would have anticipated, especially losing Ryan Jensen that first week of training camp. He's pretty much done for the year. And if he's not done for the year at this point, it seems like he'll be back for the playoffs. But it really is one of those things where when you take that into account, I know there's a couple of other playmakers on this offense that we'll talk about here shortly, but when you take into account the interior offensive line, do you think they're going to be able to get it done? Because Luke Gedeke in particular, his preseason reps against the Colts weren't too pretty.
Yeah, and I think it's a reason. And let me talk about this from a couple different angles. If you're the Buccaneers, it's next man up. Like, you're never going to create a crutch that the foundation is injury, because football is a violent physical game. So all 32 teams deal with some kind of injuries. I think it was the Browns who lost their center, I think, in the first preseason game. The Cowboys, lost Smith, the left tackle, in a preseason. So teams are going to battle through injuries. I think it's the fact that all this happened during one off season. Marpet, Kappa, Jensen, one off season, and didn't really give you enough opportunity to really fill those, needs, with first, with top of the line type talent. So they're just trying to kind of, place a body in there. But it's the reason that those guys are backups and aren't getting paid, starter money other places. So, of course, there's going to be a drop-off. What makes me nervous, and I know it was Tristan Wirfs, but when we were short an O-lineman in the Rams game, I mean, it had a huge impact. I mean, that defensive line, they really, put a lot of contact on to Tom Brady. And it looks like he's going to be able to play forever, and we hope he can, but he is 45, so could it end up being, something that debilitates, the team? Yeah, but it's also an opportunity, man. It's an opportunity for Gedeke and these guys to, to play them with their way into major contracts. I do want to, have one opinion about the schedule. So I'm a person that doesn't look at the schedule like others because, go back to last year. There's no way you could have looked at last year's schedule and thought Cincinnati was going to be a Super Bowl participant and factor that into your strength of schedule rankings. So the NFL has so much parity that the only variance I see in schedules when I look at them is I look at who are the opposing quarterbacks. And I think that's where, the schedule came up a little bit tough for Tampa because they get Dak Prescott, Jameis Winston, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, what I think is going to be an improved Mitchell Trubisky because of the consistency in Pittsburgh and the offensive talent around him, Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Matthew Stafford. Who knows what Trey Lance will be like come December. If you're going to play San Francisco, I would have loved to play them in September, not December. Then you get Joe Burrow, then Kyler Murray, then Baker again. So, they play almost all the elite quarterbacks in this league, except maybe 3 or 4. So, it's tough to beat, great quarterbacks. So I would say this, if Tampa's, battling for the 1 or 2 seed in the NFC, this will be the year I think they really overachieve to get to that level. So, I know you mentioned 12, but I'll be pleasantly surprised. But to me, 12 would be a huge accomplishment.
On the offensive side of the ball, sticking with that conversation, you look at the running back room as well, because we can talk about 12, and we can, of course, talk about the guys that he's going to be able to throw to, but Leonard Fournette just recently inked a 3-year deal with Tampa Bay, and we have heard a ton of hype about rookie running back Rachaad White. Unofficial depth chart released today from TampaBayBuccaneers.com, and it has him listed as running back 2. So what do you make of this guy? Because a lot of people said he looked good in the preseason, and I'll agree. But I'm seeing articles every other day talking about how excited we should be, and it's like Cadillac Williams level of hype, it seems, with this kid, and it wasn't like this the night that we drafted him. It seems like as more and more people have had time to kind of deep dive into what he brings to the team, people get really excited.
Well, I host a show on the VSiN network, VSIN. You download that app. You can listen for free. If you have YouTube TV, we have our own channel. And I have a show from 3 to 6 Pacific, a television show, actually, that you can also listen, of course, through all the different mechanisms, from a radio standpoint. I had Rachaad White rated as my number 2 running back coming into the draft, behind only Iowa State's Breece Hall. I remember texting some of the coaches right after the draft and say, I love that pick. Now just a little background on Rachaad. He's not a lifelong running back. He actually played receiver, ended up having to go to JUCO, transferred to Arizona State. The COVID hit, so that kind of negated, some of his experience at running back. His first year really playing, full-time running back where he was like the key guy was last year. And I think he gives the Tampa something they haven't really had, which is elusiveness, acceleration, explosiveness out of the backfield. Because of his wide receiver background, he brings that third down, ability to catch the football. So I really like his upside. I'm kind of hesitant to really be bullish on him for year 1 because his inexperience makes him a liability a lot of times in pass protection. He's still learning protections and, responsibilities and techniques. So I think that's how Leonard Fournette, initially leapfrogged, Ronald Jones and the different guys, is because, he excels, at that part of it, So once Rachaad, gains the trust of Tom and Byron from a pass protection standpoint, I think he's going to become like a household name that everyone knows about. But in the meantime, if we can get, 10 to 15 snaps per game out of him, then I think we're winning. But I did have him rated my number 2 back behind Breece Hall from Iowa State.
Yeah, and with these rookie guys coming in to, this situation here in Tampa Bay, they're also in a championship window. And I think developing talent when you have a quarterback like Tom Brady who may or may not play past next season, you kind of have to realize that, these guys would be on a much shorter leash than they would if the Bucs were an average 6 or 7 win team, where you have more time to have these guys take up some snaps on the offense and figure out what kind of player they are. But if any one of these guys can come in here and contribute year one, I think it's going to be a win for Jason Licht when you look back at his draft record. Now, for Rachaad White in his situation, he is behind Leonard Fournette, who just got paid a 3-year deal. One of the biggest reasons I think he was able to get the money he did from Tampa Bay is not only Brady coming back, but his ability to really turn around and catch the ball much better in 2021 than he did in 2020. And for a lot of people who get excited about Rachaad White, they get excited about his potential to catch the ball. I know Leonard Fournette is hopefully going to be doing his thing this year, barring an injury, but do you see Rachaad White as one of those guys who can really start to earn himself some playing time towards the end of the year when maybe your starters want to rest up for the postseason?
Has to revolve around rest. I think the talent alone, will get him on the field. Again, he just has to become trustworthy in pass protection, especially with, the issues they've had on the interior line. A lot of people are going to walk those backers up into the A gaps. They're going to go to key, and these guys prove that they can make the proper adjustments. One of the things about losing Ryan Jensen is he's the guy, when it wasn't Brady, that made the adjustments, whether it be in the run game or pass protection. So, having somebody new there, the back, his importance from a pass protection standpoint becomes vital. So I always like to under-promise, over-deliver, so that's what I'm doing here with Rachaad White, because I just think on talent alone, he's the best running back they have. But I'd rather bring him along slowly as opposed to throwing him out there and him losing his confidence, because, it's one thing if Shaun King is a quarterback and the running back missed a block and I get flattened. It's another time if it's another thing if it's a 7-time Super Bowl champ, 3-time MVP in Tom Brady where you miss a block and he gets flattened. So big Rachaad White fan. I think the fan base is going to learn to really enjoy watching him and his explosiveness. Again, Fournette gives you a security blanket, for you to take your time with Rachaad.
Oh, yeah. And that's a good feeling to have. I've always been one of those people who gets a little skeptical about paying the running back, but as far as Leonard Fournette and his development over these last 2 years, I'm fairly comfortable with a 3-year deal. And at the end of the day, you can't get mad when a guy does his job, goes out there and gets paid. So happy for everyone in that room and excited to see what Rachaad White can bring to the table this season. Let's talk about the wide receiver room really quick. I know you had some comments last time we had you on the show about Mike Evans that got some attention, but of course, Chris Godwin and his questions of how healthy he will be over the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. And then, of course, the additions following the loss of Antonio Brown. You bring in Russell Gage, sign him to a 3-year deal, which means this front office is pretty high on what he can bring to the team. But what are your thoughts on this? They were able to cut it down to 53. They carry 7 wide receivers into the season. Scotty Miller makes the cut. Rashad Perryman also still there. But what do you make of this group and kind of where they are if, depth starts getting thin like the end of last season?
Well, when they're healthy, they're as good as anybody in the league. Mike Evans is probably one of the more underrated, wide receivers, in the National Football League. I think that's what I said, that you were alluding to previously. Which comment did I make about Mike?
I had seen something that had said something of him playing outside of his prime, or he is on the latter part of his prime.
Oh, yeah.
Beginning the descent, because he is entering, I think, year 9 this year.
Yeah, yes. He's absolutely, he doesn't run like he did when he was in his first or second year. But that's everybody in the league. So it's not like an attack or a shot on Mike. It's actually a compliment because his production still has not diminished. 1,000-yard season, if I'm not mistaken, in every year of his career. He's outstanding. But, I'm a person that believes the truth doesn't have emotions. It's just the truth. And he's our number one, but he doesn't have the young legs of Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or, these guys, that are fresh, young, don't have all the hits and, the training camps and the miles on them. That's just facts. I thought Russell Gage was an excellent addition, especially, as Chris Godwin protection, just in case at the time we didn't really have a public timetable as far as a team saying he's definitively going to be back at 100%. But I mean, not a lot of people can line up Mike Evans, Russell Gage, and Chris Godwin as their top three guys. So, I think the wide receiver room is in good hands. Moving forward, you probably like to see them go and draft a young stud like a George Pickens, who I think, Pittsburgh got in the second or third round, who looks like, you'd love to, fall into one of those guys, that is on a team-friendly contract. But, I mean, as far as the 2022 season, if they aren't successful, it's not going to be because they didn't have enough talent at wide receiver. Now, the Julio Jones factor, one of the things that kind of, plagued him last year in Tennessee was he just wasn't available a lot. A lot of, little injuries here and there that made him miss a lot of games. So, we'll see if he's healthy. I do think he has viability in the red zone, where I'm interested to see, how does the red zone package look minus Gronkowski? Gronk was such a big part of what we've done in the red zone the last 2 years. So, he's not there. So I do think Julio, that big frame, that experience, that catch radius can be a plus in the red zone. So the receiver group is in good hands.
Now, if Chris Godwin isn't available to go week 1 or week 2, I know they have been pretty liberal with him at practice these past couple of weeks. We've seen him running full speed. He has been wearing a non-contact jersey most of the time because what's the point of him taking hits in training camp before the season starts? But first, do you think he's going to be ready week 1? And I guess a follow-up to that is if he's going to be missing time early in the season, do you think Julio Jones still is enough to get it done to really step up? I know he'd be like a wide receiver 3 at that point, but can he get it done for this Bucs team and really surprise a lot of people at his age?
I think Julio's the only one that has the answer to that question. I mean, he's made enough money. I mean, he's done everything. He's a no-brainer first ballot Hall of Famer. You would assume that he went to Tennessee last year and came to Tampa this year in a pursuit of trying to win a championship. A lot of people thought Tennessee had a shot last year. They still had A.J. Brown. You add Julio Jones, to Derrick Henry and that defense, and, they thought they had a chance this year. I'm assuming he's ring chasing. We'll see. Nobody really knows what Julio Jones feels like on a day-to-day basis physically but Julio Jones. So we'll find out. As far as Chris Godwin, I'd be cautious. They start the season at Dallas, at New Orleans. NFL didn't do them any favors, from an early season schedule. Then they come home versus Aaron Rodgers and then Patrick Mahomes. So, I mean, that's a tough 4 games to start the season. I wouldn't want to risk not having Godwin for the rest of the year, rushing him back. So, when you're talking about coming from a significant injury, it's not just the running in shorts. It's can you handle change of direction, weight, contact, shock to those particular areas, because, it's not flag, it's tackle out there. So, if he has to miss the first 2 weeks, to make sure he's healthy, I'm okay with that. At the same time, historically, as Buccaneers, we heal different, and the other side of that is if he's not ready on September 11th, then how could he be ready on September 25th? Coming off of a ACL, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, coming off of an ACL, what is 14 days going to do? I mean, either you're ready or you're not, you know what I mean? So, hopefully he's ready. I think Chris is a great person, and he's turned into a really great player. So I think we love for him to be available, but I want him to be healthy when he gets out there.
Yeah, I said it on our season prediction show. I don't entirely see him being ready to go for week 1. If he is, have to imagine he's on a snap count, very strict limit of how much he can be out there, what he's going to be running around and doing. But I feel like if anyone wants to make a push for him to be ready week 2 in particular, it's going to be Chris Godwin, because to go back and play the team that took you out way back when, that's going to be an exciting game for everyone watching. Of course, Jameis Winston coming back, playing healthy, always going to want to play his best against Tampa Bay. I think Chris Godwin, if he's not ready to go week 1, I think he's good week 2. But just like you said, once you get down to the nitty-gritty and just how much he has healed up until this point, what is the difference in 1 or 2 or 3 weeks going to make when it is that long-term of an injury? But it's going to be something to watch And as you guys know, we're always here rooting for Chris Godwin. But let's get into a pair of questions here from our buddy Norm Pritt before we talk about the defense here. So we open the show talking about Tom Brady, and one more question about him before we move on here. We've heard a lot of hodgepodge about his personal life these past couple of weeks. I mean, ever since he took that 11-day absence from training camp, he has kind of dominated the news cycle on what he may or may not be doing off the field. But the question we have from Norm is this. Brady's headed into year 23. This is a guy who's already retired once. He said it on the Let's Go podcast this week that he still wants to prove that he can lead a team to a championship. If he does that with Tampa Bay this season and he captures that 8th Super Bowl ring, I feel like this is almost out of the question. But if he doesn't get the job done, does he come back to play beyond this season?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, who would have thought he would have been playing at 45? And you know what makes what he's doing so impressive is, I mean, he's coming off of a Super Bowl win at 43, a season at 44, and I don't care what anybody says, Tom Brady was NFL MVP last year. And I know Aaron Rodgers won it, but I mean, at 44 to throw for what, 5,040? I mean, come on.
Yeah, a career high in passing yards. I know the Bucs asked him to do a lot. I mean, he threw the ball more than any other quarterback by a good margin, but he did it damn well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, who knows with Tom? I hope everything's all right, with him. A walk away from the field, being a former player, we don't get involved in that. We got our own stuff going on. That's not our business. I know the media, they're paid to cover a specific entity, and they have to do their job. But inside the locker room, that's not a topic of discussion. I mean, whatever he got going on, he's gonna do what he feels is in the best interest of himself and his family. And when he walk in the locker room, he one of us. We're gonna love him up. We're gonna support him. We're gonna focus on what we have to do on Sundays, and we're gonna go out and try and win football games and all that stuff there. That stuff will play out how it's supposed to play out.
The other question we have here regarding the tight end room, and I think you already know where this one is headed. Rob Gronkowski announced his retirement back in June, but it seems like ever since then, we have heard from just about everyone but the man himself that he may or may not be done playing football. When you look at Gronk, this is a guy who phoned in his at-home workouts during training camp just a couple of years ago, so he didn't have to do them. He recorded all of them in one day with a bunch of different t-shirts on, and that was his training camp session. So we know he can get it done without training camp, but do you think he does just pull a Tom Brady and come back at some point this season? A lot of signs seem to be pointing that way. Personally, I think he's done. But if there's anything we've learned about this Bucs team over the last 3 years is never say never, I guess.
No, I think he's done. I think Brady retired for 2 months, Tom and Gronkowski retired forever. And for the rest of his life, he can say, me and Brady actually retired at the same time. Now, Brady changed his mind, but, I'm a man of my word, so I'm not going back on my word. I think Gronk is done. Gronk has so many off-the-field things, that he can do, that he is doing. I think he's a fun-loving guy, and I think football was his passion, but I don't think it was overwhelming for him like it is for Tom. Like, I feel like Gronk is got 10 different things he can do post-football that makes him just as happy and brings him just as much joy. Where I think for Tom, I think that's a part of the scary thing about walking away is what else does he have that he can get the same kind of, feeling from that the game of football, being a player, has brought him. So Gronk is gone. Gronk's in the wind. Gronk's that friend that said he's going travel, and he's really going travel.
I cannot see a universe where we get, Tom Brady as DJ Tom at Sunset Music Festival or something like that, or he's slapping his sponsorship on the side of a TB12 brand energy drink or something like that, making appearances in WWE and winning championships I tend to agree with you in how Gronk's mindset works. He seems like a simple guy in more ways than one. So the fact of the matter is, he's out here enjoying his life, and he's just going to coast off of all of this sponsorship money for the rest of his life. It seems he probably doesn't even have to touch his NFL money. But I tend to agree. Like I think this is the last we have seen of Rob Gronkowski. If he wasn't battling that injury he had last year the way that he was, I know that they tried to bring him back against the Saints on Halloween a couple weeks after that, and he wasn't himself. Had to miss a couple more weeks after that, and really wasn't the same after that. I think he is he's gotten enough of a taste of the sweet life both times now that he knows he's done.
Yeah, and he's been extremely successful. Again, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. So, legacy wise, he doesn't need to come back and, win another Super Bowl or break this yardage record or this touchdown catch record to get in the Hall. He's going to get a gold jacket. So, hey, hats off to Rob Gronkowski. Great career. If you ask like the prototype modern day tight end, I mean, Gronk's, most likely the first name that comes up. So, he was one of those rare guys that had the size to attach to the tackle, the mindset and the ferocity, to be involved in the trenches. Because, it takes a strong individual. There's some strong jokers. If you ever get a chance, walk up on Vita Vea, one of those guys, and tell them just to place their hand on your shoulder. You might buckle. So to get in there, it takes a specific mindset. And then to also be able to make catches in the open field, high point and become like a receiver in the red zone, for jump balls, to make catches that have a lot of physicality around him where it's bang, bang. He didn't really have any weaknesses, and, I do think the tight end room, if there is one position that kind of concerns me, that's it. Not only do you lose Gronk, but the O.J. Howard, experiment, finally came to an end. Obviously, that'll go down as probably one of Light's misses. He hadn't had very many. But the fact that OJ hadn't really been able to establish himself anywhere else, since leaving, kind of speaks to the fact I think the Bucs made the right decision. You got Cameron Brate, who's rock solid. Kyle Rudolph, was great at Notre Dame, great for the Vikings for a while, but he's going into year 13, 12 or 13. So what does he have left? And, the other two guys are rookies.
Yeah, I was going to just piggyback there. A pair of rookies, Cade Otton, he had some success catching the football in the preseason, but not really known for his blocking. And we've heard a lot of good things about Keeft, but the fact of the matter is, just like you said, he's a rookie and there isn't that experience factor there. So while the Bucs kind of did what they could, it seems like it took them 3 separate players to maybe fill the hole that a Gronkowski is going to leave. The fact of the matter is, it's still hard to replace a guy like Big 87.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the trust quotient. If you think about Brady's tenure here in Tampa, he's generally looked for Gronk in the most pressure-packed situations. Like, okay, kind of, we got to have a play right here. It's 80% of the time, being Gronkowski. So, again, they did a good job with Russell Gage and Julio Jones. And, if Kyle Rudolph, has another year in him, at least having some experience there. But I don't think that position will be as impactful this year as it has the last 2.
Yeah, it'll be tough, but certainly something to watch here as we talk about this Buccaneers offense. We kind of put a bow on that side of the football and take a look at the defensive starters for Tampa Bay. Firstly, addressing what they did in the offseason. We look at the new defensive line. You'd kind of mentioned it previously, a little bit earlier on the show. They decided to move on from Jason Pierre-Paul and Ndamukong Suh, who both are still unsigned as of this recording, which I guess is a curious case there. Not sure if it comes down to maybe a salary dispute or just not really finding that right fit, but to address it, they bring in Akeem Hicks. You get Joe Tryon-Shoyinka getting a little bit more reps on the outside as a pass rusher. And then they signed Carl Nassib, who makes his return to Tampa Bay as some rotational depth there on the edge. You still got Shaq Barrett holding it down on the other side. And, of course, Big Vita Vea, who was just named a team captain this year for the first time in his career. What do you make of this Bucs front seven? And overall, how do you think the pass rush is going to work this year? Is it going to be better? Is it going to stay stagnant? Is the run defense going to be just as good?
Well, I think it's TBD, and we'll find out. It definitely doesn't have as much star power. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Ndamukong Suh was the first pick in the draft. Am I right about that? Did he go 1 and McCoy went 2?
I want to say it was 2-3. Let me double check for you.
Okay, you might be right.
Yeah, he was number 2. Gerald McCoy was number 3.
Okay, who went 1 that year?
Let me see here. Sam Bradford to St. Louis.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So the star power isn't what it was. You know, him and Jason Pierre-Paul, you know, even if people didn't know Pierre-Paul played for the Giants, he did it one time and was outstanding as the opposite defensive end to Michael Strahan. Most people probably know him from the firecracker incident on the 4th of July, but he came to Tampa and was extremely productive. You know, so losing those two guys who probably are on the backside of their careers, you know, just to speak on them not having signed with a team, you know, I call it plenty of money problems. So when guys have that much money, they don't really have any problems. So instead of going somewhere and having to go through training camp, they'll stay and kind of pick and choose. I want to say Michael Bennett did this a few years ago, you know, where he kind of waited to see how the early part of the season played out. Okay, where can I go and, you know, potentially have a good chance to win another championship. So I think that's what both of those guys are doing. Vita Vea, tremendous talent. I think he's established himself. Joe Tryon, you know, has had flashes. You know, the big thing is going to be, can those guys handle the increased snap count? You know, the one thing about, you know, Suh and Pierre-Paul was they ate up a lot of snaps and did it at a winning level, if not a Pro Bowl level at all times. You know, at this point in their career, it's still a winning level. So, you know, can those young guys handle the extra snaps? We'll see. And guys like Carl Nassib and those guys, they're going to be a rotation. They're going to rotate guys. But, you know, this is an opportunity. You know, I think they might have the best back seven in football behind them, or at least one of the top 3 or 4, you know, back sevens in football. I'm talking about the Bucs linebackers and secondary. So that helps. And then Todd will get creative in how he brings his pressures. You know, hopefully we stay out of the cover 0 against Cooper Kupp. But other than that, I'm all for, you know, being aggressive.
When you evaluate the Buccaneers defense, it seems like the conversation on the linebackers is pretty open and shut, as you had alluded to. Levante David returning still looks as quick as ever this preseason. Devin White expected to have a big year after kind of a quiet year last year, but still more than serviceable as a linebacker in the NFL. Has a promising young career on his hands. But the name that a lot of people got this preseason was Olakunle Fadakazi. I'm sure I butchered that somewhere. But he basically made himself a spot on the roster, and with the departure of Grant Stewart, he could be looked at in the same capacity as just rotational depth. You'll probably see him a little bit more later on in the year, but I don't know if you got to see any of what he was able to bring this preseason. Led the team in tackles in those first 2 preseason games, and definitely earned a spot on the team.
Yeah, young, explosive player. You know, hopefully he can continue to develop. And he's got 2 great teachers. You know, Levante David, I mean, he's just been a pillar, you know, from the time he came from Nebraska. A lot of people, you know, used to compare him to Derek Brooks, you know, because of the size, you know, similarities, you know, undersized, but plays so much bigger and so much faster. And, you know, that's a lot of expectations to put on a player, you know, and I only think there would ever be one Derek Brooks, but, you know, Levante can hold his head high because he's been an outstanding player. You know, Devin White, a lot of people don't know this, but he's your favorite player's favorite player. Like I have Brian Urlacher on my show every Monday, and he said the favorite player in the NFL to watch is Devin White, unsolicited, because people just like the way he plays with the speed, the acceleration, you know, the violence. You know, people love Devin, and if he continues to improve, I mean, he's going to be a generational player. what can you say about? I mean, Shaq Barrett's listed as a linebacker. I know he, plays with his hand in the dirt more than anything. But I mean, that's an outstanding group. A lot of teams would die to have a Levante David and a Devin White. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the rookie's name, but getting to learn from those two, about how to be a professional, that's outstanding.
I've said it a lot with Devin White too. He's fun to watch because I attribute it to his farm strength. You hear a lot about how he's got his own stables and he's grown up a lot in the farm setting, but that farm strength is no joke, man. When you've been tossing around hay bales and feed bags for 15, 20 years, the calluses in your hands, it just adds another layer of strength. Like those old guys that just have that unbreakable strength. I know you know what I'm talking about as a Florida guy.
Yes. So we call it country strong.
Yeah.
The guy never lifted a weight in his life, but man, if he put his hands on you, I mean, you think he was like training for Mr. Universe, since birth, and that's what them country boys are, and Devin fits that criteria, and I mean, he's been an outstanding player. That's a phenomenal draft pick, by management. Jason did an excellent job evaluating him out of LSU, and I mean, he's been tremendous.
So let's get to the back end of this defense here and start to round some things out with the secondary. Head coach Todd Bowles actually announced this week that Jamel Dean would get the start at that quarterback 2 spot. What do you make of this secondary? You got Carlton Davis, obviously a seasoned vet at this point, it seems, in the NFL, re-signed with Tampa Bay just last offseason. Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting heading into crucial years here, and then the rookie bringing up the pack, Zion McCollum. And then also the safety room. You got Antoine Winfield Jr. heading into a promising third year. Mike Edwards getting a bit bigger of a role this year. Keanu Neal and Logan Ryan, new additions there as well. But for the starters, this unit, I'd say for the most part, at least in that cornerback room, you're starting to see some consistency. And Carlton Davis is really etched out of place as one of the better corners in the NFL, I think.
I don't think Kevin Ross gets enough credit for the job he's done. Antoine Winfield, of course, has been a baller since he stepped, and into one bug. Carlton Davis, outstanding, player from Auburn as well. But there are times, people thought Sean Murphy-Bunting was a bust out of Central Michigan. And, Kevin has continued to work with him. They moved him to nickel, a couple years ago, which I thought really helped him. And he's really turned into a tremendous player for us. The same way with Jamal Dean. I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, I think it was the Rams game when he just got blitzkrieged. I mean, they were throwing the ball all over his head. And I mean, majority of the fan base was like, we got to get rid of this guy. And Kevin Ross, never lost confidence in him. We kept, building him up, kept working on his fundamentals. And, now he's being rewarded. And we're long and experienced in our secondary. And people would die for that. I mean, when you talk about Shaun, Carlton, and Jamal, I think the shortest one is what, 6'1"? So I mean, that's a great luxury to have at that position to compete with these taller receivers, that are athletic, and it makes up for Antoine Winfield, not being, the biggest safety. But I mean, he reminds me a lot of Rondé Barber from an instinct standpoint, just his football IQ. And you expect that, being the son of Antoine Winfield, who was a great safety at Ohio State and Minnesota. So, I don't, think Mike Edwards is as accomplished as the rest of them. But again, Kevin Ross deserves a lot of credit. He's a guy going into his 4th year with Tampa. He's kind of groomed him for this role. And now we get to see, him go out and get a chance to be the everyday starter. So, Kevin doesn't get enough credit for what he's done with the guys on that back end, especially considering they have not gone out in free agency and paid superstar money for a Jesse Bates or Marcus Williams or May, guys that have been available. So, hats off to Kevin Ross.
Yeah, and a lot of guys in the secondary with contract years coming up. So if they show out this year, you may have to fork out a little bit of extra money that you didn't expect to pay if you were to re-sign them this last offseason. But obviously, a lot of that is yet to be determined, but it should be a fun thing to watch play out over the course of the season. As we wrap things up, need to get a game prediction for you. Bucs versus Cowboys, AT&T Stadium, Sunday Night Football, Week 1 football. We have made it, my friend. It's game week. Football is back, the most beautiful sport in the world. We'll see Dak Prescott and Tom Brady in Jerryland. How do you think this one's going to go? There's a lot of firsts for both teams, and I know that Dallas is kind of dealing with some own injuries in their camp over there. So it'll be interesting to see how these guys come out. But where do you think the Bucs are in week 1 squaring off against Dallas?
I think it's going to be a great game. I don't think the game flow is going to be like last year where it turned into a shootout. I think last year people expected Tampa to really roll Dallas and Dak Prescott, healthy Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb. I mean, they were exceptional and really gave us some fits. I think this one's going to be a more tightly contested game, played closer to the vest offensively. I think Tampa's still trying to navigate through what they really have on the interior of the offensive line, especially when you have a Micah Parsons type in week 1, who excelled last year at rushing the quarterback. And the same thing for Dallas. After, Smith went down, hell, they just signed 40-year-old Jason Peters, just so they can get through practice.
What a sight for Eagles fans, by the way, man. I mean, that's got to hurt. That's got to be rough. See the picture of him signing the contract, just head to toe in Dallas gear.
And, they got some injuries at receiver, some guys that aren't available. So, I'm going to say Tampa wins. I'm going to go 21-14, somewhere in that area. I think Tom finds a way to get it done. I think Vita, Shaq, those guys get off to a good start, against a very depleted Dallas offensive line. Remember, they lost Lyle Collins to the Bengals. The kid they drafted in the first, Tyler Smith from Tulsa, he's a developmental guy, and I think he's starting. So, advantage Tampa in a lot of ways. So I'm going to go 21-14 Tampa. I don't think it'll be as high scoring as last year.
I tend to agree there, but you heard it here, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that's just about going to do it for this week's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast with special guest, former Bucs quarterback coach Shaun King. Pleasure to have you here. Anything you want to plug before we wrap things up?
Yeah, you guys can follow me at Real Shaun King on Twitter. I'm telling you, it's a truth-only zone. So if you don't like the truth, if your feelings get hurt easy, you probably just don't want to comment because I'm going to respond. Also, I have a television show. I'm living out in the beautiful city of Las Vegas now. It's called VSiN Primetime, VSIN. It's from 3 to 6 Pacific. You guys can download the VSiN app, VSIN, and listen for free. Or if you have YouTube television, we have our own channel on there. You guys can watch the show as well. If you guys are into sports wagering, go to vsin.com/subscribe. We have our college and pro betting guides out. We do all the work for you. All you have to do is purchase the guide and then follow what we tell you to do for a profitable football season. So, hey, man, I'm going to be a permanent part of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm excited about it. Excited to be joining you guys, also be joining Believe. So I'm looking forward to some great things. And, hey, man, let's go Bucs. Wouldn't it be great to send Brady out, with another championship? It'd be pretty dope, for the community, for the organization, and for Tom. I hope he has a lot of success this year. He's been so good for the game of football, so I hope we can. And I guess I'm jumping the gun on sending him out. Who knows with Tom?
Yeah.
He might be playing at 49.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And, this Brady era in Tampa Bay history is already looked at as one of the better runs in the history of the team. Of course, everybody's going to look at those teams, the Dungy teams from the late 90s, and, of course, the team that got it done in 2002. But, I mean, just the level of success that this team has had, if they can some way figure out a way to reel in 2 championships in 3 years with the greatest of all time at quarterback, it'll be some of the best football I think some of us will ever remember. And I'm just grateful we get to watch it for another season. Should be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for jumping on the pod with us this week. Ladies and gentlemen, follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. Last but not least, you can find myself on social media, Instagram and Twitter at Redicus. If you follow me, I will follow you back. But that's the show. We'll catch up with you later on this week for a more in-depth game preview. The Buccaneers taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Evan should be off of the IR for that one, so we'll have him back. It should be a great show. Excited to kick off a great year of coverage. And Yeah, man, football's back. It's game week, baby. I really cannot believe it. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. We'll catch you in the next one. Until then, and as always, go Bucks.